Hello. Today we're going to talk about connecting to a database using Pdo in PHP. In a previous video, I talked about why you might want to use Pdo and provided a general overview of what we're going to be doing in this video. Trying to make this one short, sweet, and cover all of the basics that you need to get started with Pdo. So, I'm just going to get started here. So I'm going to open and close some PHP tags. Now, creating a connection to a database is always kind of difficult. And it's not difficult in that you have to understand things really well. It's just the kind of place where you're going to make a lot of typos. Today, this is going to go pretty easy for me because I'm using XAMPP, which is a local test environment. Very easy in terms of managing like the username and the password because that stuff's pretty much just non-existent. But if you're going to use this on a live server, which you are going to at some point, the most likely place where you're going to run into trouble is going to be with your username and your password and case sensitivity and things like that. Because when we're talking about PHP, we're talking about Linux, and we're talking about things like spaces, case sensitivity. I'm just telling you ahead of time, that's where your problems are probably going to happen. So, without any more chatting about it, first thing we're going to do is create our connection. So, this is just going to be a variable. I'm going to call it PDO. I call it all kinds of things. Some people call it con. And so what we're going to do is create a PDO object. So new PDO. And then inside of these parentheses, we're going to pass some pretty gruesome stuff. So to be clear, what we're going to pass in here is everything you need to connect to your database. This is where you're probably going to make the mistakes. This could be it, but we're going to go past this. So what we're going to do is pass it three things, and each one of them is a string, so I'm kind of just going to shell them out. I do that just to provide the shape of things. This first one is the hard one. For sure, the first one is the hard one. All right, so this first part here is where you're going to make the mistakes. This is going to be a big string, and it's going to be a bunch of values separated by semicolons. The first thing that we're going to enter is the database driver. So I'm doing MySQL, so I'm going to enter MySQL. One of the upsides to PDO is that this is portable to other databases, so that could vary. If you're using XAMPP, it's probably just MySQL, but you could change that. That's one of the upsides, is that's where you make your change. And then we're going to write a colon, and then host. All right, so since we're working local in XAMPP, we're going to say localhost. I also want to kind of dispel the idea that I think some people think that, well, fine, let me just write it first. I think some people are thinking this is going to be different on your remote web server. It's not going to be different. Well, it could be, but it's not likely to be different. All that means is that your database and your web server are running on the same server, and they are in XAMPP locally, but they're also probably doing that remotely as well. You could have to make some alterations there, but localhost is an important thing you need to enter. Then a colon separating my next key value pair. And so this is going to be the name of the database that you want to connect to. So db name, not bd name, but db name. So this is going to be the name of the database that you're connecting to. If you're doing this remotely, it's going to be a big ugly name probably, because it's going to be something probably with like a username and an underscore and then the name of the database. But since I'm doing this locally, I'm going to make it real easy on myself and just do MyDB. That means I have a pre-existing database called MyDB. If you don't have a pre-existing database, well, you're not going to be able to connect to a database. Go create one. It's pretty easy. I know. I'd like to show you how to do it, but not now. The next thing up is you're going to want to, so another semicolon, separating another key value pair. And on this one, we're going to do the char set. So this is optional, but you want to specify this because you can run into issues. If you don't, it's actually pretty common. Just for fun, go to Google, put in PDO, put in char set, and you will see a whole bunch of people who had problems, and they fixed them by specifying the char set. Yes, you could do something other than UTF-8. That probably is even a good idea, but I'm just trying to make this functional. All right, so that's the big first string. So database driver, localhost, name of your database, character set. The rest of this is kind of easy. Here in XAMPP, this is just going to be root. There's no way that root is going to fly on a remote server. So I don't know, whatever your actual username is. And in XAMPP, the default password is blank. So I'm just going to go with that. Like I said, this is going to be more difficult in a live web server because you're not going to be able to get away with easy things like that, and that. This is just a bad idea, but it works fine for what we're doing. There's nobody who can help you with your username and password other than yourself. It's case sensitive. That's a lot of the problems that you'll run into. So at this point, that is how you connect to a database. Let's see how it goes. To make this thing work, I'm going to need to save it. Pdo.php. And then I'm going to need to run it. And there it is, looking like nothing. The interesting thing about this is going to look like nothing if you do it right. All right, so I run it and I get absolutely nothing. That's actually good, believe it or not. That's one of the things about creating a Connect script is that if it does nothing, it's good. And that's not a very satisfying feeling. But here's what I can tell you. Like, let's say I do 123 for the password, which it's not. And then I reload this page. I get a fatal error. That is a stack trace. So we immediately run into one of the difficulties with Pdo right here. So you'll see the default behavior on a bad connection is a stack trace. And that stack trace dumps both my username and password in plain text. That is not cool by any definition of the word cool. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So the big picture here is we're not happy with the default error handling that's going on, which means we're going to need try-catch blocks. So while this is how you connect to a database, and that's kind of probably why you're here, you really have to wrap this thing in try-catch blocks. If you don't know about error handling and try-catch blocks, well, I'm not exactly teaching that lesson today, but I'm going to show you kind of sort of how to deal with it here. So try, meaning this is the part of code which might throw an error. Catch, meaning we're going to look for certain errors and handle them. That's kind of what's going on here. So in this catch block, you're going to have to write Pdo exception. That has to be written just like that. And then I'm creating a variable. I'm calling it E. It's a pretty standard thing to do. So you can call this whatever you want. That's really not up for negotiation. And then in here, so I'm saying, hey, I don't like that it's doing that stack trace. So here's where I'm going to define what is going to happen if we have some issues. I'm just going to echo, and I'm going to use that object called E that I just created. There's that arrow operator. Get message is a method of that object. So that right there, it's hard to explain, and you see that this could become a 20-minute video real quickly. But this is going to say, instead of doing the stack trace that it was doing, I want you to look for a Pdo exception. I'm going to call my instance of this exception E, and I'm going to get a message, and I'm going to display that, and I'm going to get something like that. And this is much better. For those of you that learned in something like MySQLi, this is kind of sort of like what the errors looked like there. So access denied for root. That's not too problematic, really. And if I do something like make up a silly user, so you saw what it looked like when I had a bad password. I also do want to point out, see the number of the error. That kind of sort of means bad password error. So 1044 is a different error. You can figure out a little bit about what's actually going on with these error numbers, and there's functions for that. Right, I mean, I don't know how much of this I want to do. Here I'll screw up the database, and let's see how that goes. Unknown database, MyDB. So you see some of these are more helpful than others for error messages. They all have a unique ID. All of it is better than just dumping the username and the password. So when I say that you need to do this, well, you really do need to do this, and you're going to be, kind of have to use try-catch blocks if you're going to use Pdo. And so in my video before this, which I'll call an overview, I talked about this not being the easiest thing to get started with, even though this right here wasn't terribly difficult, in my opinion. And once you've done this once, this is your Connect script. You can reuse it forever. If you find yourself writing this more than once, you're doing it wrong. You should have this file created one time, and you should have it up out of your public directories, and you should just require this file every time. So while we're doing some setup and some things that aren't intuitive today, you're never going to have to do this again. On the subject of never having to do things again, just take my advice on this. So one thing that we're also going to do, other than this try-catch, is we need to change the way that errors are handled, generally speaking, in Pdo. By default, PDO is on silent mode, which means that all of your SQL errors when it comes to running your queries, nothing's going to happen. Like if you have just bad SQL or you screwed up with something, you're not going to get any errors, and it's pretty much impossible to debug. So what I think you need to do here is inside of this try catch block, right below where you created this connect, what we need to do is configure some properties. So we're going to call a function called setAttribute. Well, I guess it's a method, right? Because it belongs to an object. And then we're just going to pass it some grisly stuff. I'm not looking forward to trying to type this. Pdo attr underscore air mode comma Pdo air mode exception. And did I spell those things right? I think I did. Basically what you did is you turned on exceptions. And so if things go wrong with your SQL, this will now make it so you can get error messages out of that, and so you can do useful try catches on your queries. If you don't set this here, then you kind of have no clue as to whether your SQL is working or not. So this is what you need to create a connect script in PDO. And so this is more involved than a connect script would have been with MySQLi, but PDO allows us to do some cool things. So if you're able to get to this point, this is just a reusable script, and you have cleared half of the hurdles to getting started with PDO. So try and not get too intimidated by this, but you got to understand that if you're going to use PDO and get anything out of it, this is probably the minimum to getting started with it. So I hope this helped you to get connected to PDO. In my next video, we'll actually do some queries. It's weird that what we're doing here today produces nothing, right? It doesn't feel like we did anything, but I'm telling you, this was actually pretty significant. So I hope this helped, and hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.